As part of the Friends mission, we want to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. This is our last lecture for 2025, but coming up in January is our seed starting lecture and seed swap. And there's more information about that on our website, fopcon.org. Also, the Oak Park Conservatory opens its Winter Greens Market tomorrow. So drop by to shop for a variety of gorgeous greenery, wreaths, and accents to brighten up your porch pots and your home. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. Ken Johnson, who's been here before, is the horticulture educator from the University of Illinois Extension that serves Calhoun, Cass, Greene, Morgan, and Scott counties. His educational efforts focus on fruit and vegetable production, pest management, and beneficial insects. Through his programming efforts, he aims to increase backyard food production and foster a greater appreciation of insects. He is one of the authors of the Good Growing blog and one of the Good Growing podcast hosts. Tonight, Karen Alvilla is my co-host, along with Casey Nikoloff, who will manage the Q&A for us tonight. Be sure to start putting your questions into the chat as soon as you think of them, and then Casey will run through them at the end of the program, and we'll get some answers for you. I will now turn the program over to Ken. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
All right. Thank you, Sue. So we will go ahead and get started here. All right. So hopefully you're seeing the actual PowerPoint now, not my notes. Also, like mentioned, we're going to talk about houseplant pest management. So, I'm assuming most of you have houseplants since you're attending this session. And, houseplants, unfortunately, one of the one of the things we commonly encounter is pests, particularly this time of year, especially if we've had them outside and we've transitioned them indoors. A lot of times we bring in a lot of pests with us. So, what are some of the steps we can do to try to manage or lessen the effects that these pests have? So, and tonight we're going to talk about primarily insects and mites. So first off, so when it comes to managing pests on our, in this case, houseplants or really any pest management in general, this is all going to start with scouting. So going out and looking at our plants. The sooner we find a problem, the sooner we can do something about it, the easier it is to manage problems. So early detection is going to be key, especially when it comes to houseplants, because a lot of times we're kind of limited with what we can do when it comes to managing pests on a lot of houseplants. So again, this can be visual inspection, just going through, checking out your plants, looking at your plants every once in a while. More than just a quick glance, flip over some leaves, look closely at the buds, the growth points, things like that. That's where a lot of pests tend to congregate. And once we see or we may notice some symptoms, some yellowing, some wilting, something like that, if we notice that, then we definitely want to look closer to see if we can see what's causing that problem to be happening. And it's going to be especially important to scout plants, and this is going to be a recurring theme before we buy plants. So don't bring problems home with you. So if you're out buying a new house plant, now we're getting into November. So if you're going out and buying poinsettias or Norfolk Island pines or holiday cacti, what have you, inspect those plants carefully at the store so you're not bringing any problems home with you. Again, and hopefully you've brought your plants in already, but if for some reason you haven't and they haven't been killed, again, make sure you're inspecting them closely so you're not bringing problems inside from outdoors. So when it comes to managing pests, we're going to be doing, ideally, we're going to do IPM or integrated pest management. So with this, we're going to be using 4 different techniques: our cultural management, our physical or mechanical, biological, and chemical control or management strategies in order to manage pests in houseplants. So with cultural management, we're trying to maintain plant health. Healthy plants are able to withstand attack from insects, better able to ward off diseases than plants that are stressed or not growing well. Similar with humans, when you're stressed, it seems like you tend to get sick more often than if you're healthy, you're getting enough sleep, you're eating well, you're exercising, all of that stuff. So a lot of this is going to come down to a right plant in the right place. So making sure you're getting proper light levels. Most of our house plants are going to want like bright indirect light, but some of them can handle more or less light. So just make sure you're matching up the light intensity with what your plants are going to require. Humidity. A lot of many houseplants can handle lower humidity, but most of them are going to thrive when we have higher humidity conditions. Again, a lot of our houseplants are more tropical plants, so they like that more humid conditions. And when we think about our homes, especially during the winter, it can be rather dry. 20% humidity. So if we can, clumping plants, if you have a lot of plants running a humidifier, putting them with orchids, people a lot of times will have the trays with rocks and water in them, and the pots above that. Just make sure the pots aren't sitting in the water. But anything you can do to help increase the humidity around plants will probably more than likely make them a lot happier. And the temperature, again, a lot of these again are tropical plants, so they don't like really cold temperatures. So hopefully you're running the heat in your house. I know in my house we set our heat at 55, and that's really because I don't want to kill the house plants. If it was up to me, I'd probably let it go colder because we can always add more layers as humans, but the plants don't really like it much lower than 55. So, and another thing is water use. Um, Probably more houseplants are probably killed by overwatering than anything else. So, again, different houseplants are going to have different watering requirements. So again, a lot of times when you're buying these, they're going to come with labels and they're going to tell you how much light they need, how much water they need, that stuff. So make sure you're following those recommendations for those individual plants. So talk about a little bit about some basic care for houseplants. Again, the healthy plants are going to be better able to withstand attacks and stuff like that. So again, the light is going to be the most limiting factor for most people when growing indoors. The house I live in, we don't have a lot of good lights, or we don't have good windows for lighting for houseplants. So a lot of the plants we're growing are going to be under grow lights and stuff. So ideally, if you've got windows, great. Put them in the windowsill. Make sure you don't have the leaves touching the windows, especially during the winter. Sometimes those windows can get rather cold and it can damage the leaves of plants. So make sure they're not pressed up against that. But if windows aren't an option, again, indoor lights, grow lights, something like that. Ideally, fluorescent bulbs or LED bulbs, something like that, are going to be the best options for that indoor lighting. Again, we talked about humidity a little bit already. Um, the more humidity you can provide a plant, again, the better its off it's going to be. Like a lot of times in the winter, we're down less than 20% humidity. Most plants are going to like that 35 to 85% humidity. I don't know if we want to keep our plant houses around 85% humidity. Humans don't really like that all that much, but again, trying to raise that, it's just going to make your plants grow a little bit better, keep them a little bit happier. And for some of these pests we get into a little bit later, some pests are going to thrive on low humidity conditions. So if you have some of these pests popping up, it may be an indication that your humidity is going to be too low. Again, temperatures that we're comfortable at, plants are also going to be comfortable at. When we think about typically when we're heating our houses, we keep it at the same temperature both day and night. And we think about what plants are exposed to out in the environment. Typically, days are warmer and nights are cooler. So if you're going to be really a hardcore plant parent, that may be setting temperatures, 65, 75 during the day and then letting those temperatures drop a little bit at night. Just so they're exposed to that kind of that natural cycle that they normally would be. But if you keep it at, consistent temperature, I, they're not going to get too upset about that. And again, water is going to be probably the most common way plants are going to be killed. Either usually too much watering, but underwatering can be an issue as well. So when you're reading plant tags, a lot of times there's going to be different terminology on those. So heavy watering. So you're going to keep our soil consistently moist but not soggy. So we're not going to let that dry out. Medium moisture, or plants at like medium moisture levels, we're going to allow the surface to dry out before we're watering. Again, moderate, we're going to allow the soil to dry out a little bit more, down several inches before we water again. And then light, we're really only trying to keep that root ball wet. We're going to let the soil really dry out. Think things like cactus and stuff like that, where you can go sometimes weeks without watering them. So again, make sure you're matching up your watering regimen with what your plants want.
It looks like we've lost you, Ken.
Hmm.
Give this a minute and hope it leaps back in.
Okay.
Need to come back in a few minutes, I think. He was saying that they had some interruption in their connections down there today, but it had been pretty good. So hoping to keep our fingers crossed that things would go well. There you are.
Keep talking.
Yeah.
Where'd you lose me at?
I think probably the slide before the just watching the amount of water.
This one.
Yeah.
All right. To get through all.
Oops. There we go again. Somehow, computer does not like this slide. It's always very frustrating in these programs. We've been pretty lucky so far, so hoping this will come back. Lushkin. May free up some bandwidth. Okay. Thanks, Casey. I should have thought of that myself. Sometimes we just use up too much energy, I think. Well, I'm sorry I don't have any music to play in the meanwhile. I was sitting here very quietly. I think we're coming back. There we go. Okay. Okay, we were there.
All right. So we're here. Did I get through any of the definitions at all before you lost me?
Yeah, you got through those.
Through all of them?
Casey
Okay.
thought if you turned off your camera, it might be easier. We wouldn't use as much.
All right. I will do that. And I turned on the hotspot on my phone instead of using the office internet since it's being problematic. All right. So when to water? So there's several different ways we can kind of test to see when we need to water stuff. So we can do this by touching the soil, stick your finger in the pot, see when it's starting to dry out. It's probably gonna be the most common way people will do it. You can do it by color. Yeah, moist soil or moist potting mix is going to look much darker than stuff that's starting to dry out. You can also do it by weight. You're going to take a little bit of time to familiarize yourself with, kind of how heavy a pot is when it's fully watered and how heavy it is when it needs to be watered. But, over time you can kind of work that out. Or you can get some kind of a water indicator. They'll show you the moisture in the soil, moisture meter, something like that. But I would say most people are going to do it by touch. But again, and a lot of times those moisture meters are not all that reliable. And like I mentioned before, we don't really want to do that calendar watering because when plants are actively growing, they're going to be using much more moisture. A lot of times when they're indoors during the winter, we have lower light levels. A lot of times cooler temperatures, they're not going to be growing nearly as much as if they are outside in warmer conditions. So setting watering every Friday or every other Friday Sometimes may work, but a lot of times you're going to be better off actually checking those pots occasionally to see when they actually need water. So, and a lot of times you can't necessarily go by symptoms on us or what you're seeing with the plants to determine if you're over or under watering. A lot of these times, these symptoms are going to look rather similar. In both cases, the roots aren't getting enough. If the roots are kind of getting stressed, so when we're overwatering, the roots aren't may not be getting enough oxygen. Those roots will start to die. Those plants are going to wilt because they're not taking up water. Underwatering is going to cause the same thing. They're not able to take up enough water. So we can get wilting when we're both overwatering and underwatering plants. When we're underwatering, a lot of times the newer leaves are going to be yellow. They're going to be stressed. But this can also happen with overwatering as well. So again, those two are going to have potentially similar symptoms for the same problem there. When we are underwatering, though, a lot of times the older leaves will start to turn yellow. The plants kind of sacrifice those older leaves and shunt those resources to the newer leaves to try to maintain them. So that can be an indication if your older leaves are starting to turn yellow that you may be underwatering. Spider mites, again, we'll talk about these in a little bit. Spider mites like dry conditions. So if you start seeing spider mites show up, it could be indication your plants are getting dry and your humidity is low as well. And then root rot. So if you were to take those plants out of the pot and the roots are black, they're slimy, you kind of run your finger over them. The outer layers of the roots kind of slough off. The soil smells bad. It's going to be an indication you're overwatering. You're starting to get rot. You're starting to get fungus and bacteria growing in there. Mostly bacteria for the bad smells. There's going to be an indication that you're overwatering. It's also a good idea to kind of groom and clean your plants. A lot of plants have waxy surfaces. You may dust them off. So again, they're getting more light there. If they get a lot of accumulation of dust and debris on there, it can interfere with their ability to take up light. So clean them occasionally, dust them, what have you. If you've got dead plant material, dead leaves and stuff on those plants, pull those off. Sometimes those can be reservoir for pests or for pathogens to get in as well. So just do a good job of cleaning up every now and then. And your plants are going to look better too if you do that. When it comes to potting mixes, our soilless mix is going to be preferred. So our potting media, we don't want to use soil from outside. That soil is going to have pathogens in it. It's going to have potentially insects in it. It's going to also be rather heavy. So it's not going to drain very well. With our potting media, it's going to drain well. A lot of times these are going to be sterile or they're going to be sterilized in a lot of cases. So hopefully we're not bringing in pathogens or insects in those bags. But that can't happen. I've had potting mix that we bought from a box store that's probably been sitting out for a while, and it was absolutely filled with fungus gnats. So you'll get to see some pictures of that in a few slides with some of the sticky traps we had to set up. And again, we want to use a good general purpose potting mix. Maybe not go for the cheapest stuff, but you definitely don't have to go buy the most expensive stuff either. A lot of them will have water absorbing polymers and fertilizers and stuff like that. That's not really necessary. If you want to do it, great, but there's really no need to spend the extra money, especially on the water absorbing polymers and stuff. And the fertilizer, sometimes it's too much, sometimes it's not enough. It just kind of depends on the plant. So a lot of times you're better off adding your own fertilizer, just adding that into your watering routine. So speaking of fertilizer, really, again, we only want to put fertilizer down when our plants are actively growing, or we have, the family heirloom Christmas cactus that's been growing in the same pot or same soil for 30, 40, 50, 100 years, something like that. That's when we want to fertilize. This time of year, again, in winter, a lot of our plants aren't growing a whole lot, so we don't really need to worry about fertilizing. They're not putting on new growth. They don't need a lot of those nutrients because they're not putting on new growth. There's a lot of different types. You can get in the jar there, you can get the little pellets. Those are slow release. So they have a coating on there that will absorb water and slowly release the fertilizer that's inside of there. The issue with those, once they get wet, if they dry out, they'll crack a lot of times and release all the fertilizer. So you kind of lose the slow release. So you need to keep those consistently moist for them to really work effectively. There's the sticks you can put into pots. Liquid fertilizer. A lot of times you're putting that on at half strength. Liquid fertilizer is nice because you just do it, a lot of times every other watering, something like that. read the label. It'll tell you how often you need to. And typically, again, we're using a lower analysis, a 1-2-1, 1-1-1, something like that. Like that. Again, most of these plants don't need a whole lot of fertility. When you think about a lot of these are growing in forest, rainforest, or tropical settings where there's not a whole lot of nutrients in the soil and stuff. And they've got a lot of competition for that stuff as well. All right, so speaking of the fungus gnats coming in potting mix, this is a picture of a sticky trap we set up at my house to catch all of those fungus gnats coming out of the potting soil that we used when we repotted plants earlier this year. So with physical and mechanical management strategies, we're trying to physically eliminate pests from our plants or remove them once they're there. So washing leaves can be an important one for a lot of the pests we're going to talk about. Hand picking insects off, or if you have diseased leaves, pick those off. Make sure it's dry. If things are wet, that's easy. That's an easy way to transfer disease or move disease around. So make sure things are dry when you're doing that. Trapping. So here, yellow sticky card can be effective for things like fungus gnats. They're attracted to that. They'll fly to that. You can use that to monitor for them, or in our case, what we're doing is we're trying to trap them out. We're trying to catch as many as we can so they're not laying eggs and reproducing. And sometimes it may be hard to do, but sometimes plants get so infested, you're better off just throwing them away and starting over. I have done that multiple times. I'm never buying a citrus plant again because I always end up with scale all over them or mealybugs, and they spread to everything else. I don't know how many citrus plants and other house plants I've lost because the pests start off on there and then spread to everything else. So sometimes it's better just cut your losses and start over instead of letting it spread everywhere and wipe out your entire collection. Biological, when your plants are outside, this is probably going to be a little bit more of a factor than when they're indoors. But with this, we're trying to manage pests with natural enemies. So we have things like predators. So the picture on the left there, that is an aphid lion. This is a larvae of a lacewing, so it's going to feed on small, soft-bodied insects. Top right there, that's a parasitoid wasp. So this wasp is laying an egg inside of an aphid. That wasp larvae will hatch, will eat the inside of the aphid, and then emerge. And then down below that, on the right hand side, those are nematodes, and these can be applied to the soil to manage things like fungus gnats that are going to be in the soil. You can buy all of these and release them in your house if you want. They can be rather pricey. I know down here in Jacksonville, you cannot buy these anywhere in stores. I don't know up in Chicagoland if you have any nurseries that would sell it, but more than likely you're going to be buying this online, and they're not particularly cheap. So probably not practical for the average homeowner to do something like this. This is going to be more like a greenhouse thing, but it is an option. And when your plants are outside, they're going to be exposed to these predators, these parasites, these parasitoids are going to manage a lot of these pests when they're outdoors. When we bring them in, we lose those predators, those parasitoids, things like that. That's when those pest populations can really spike because there's nothing. These natural enemies are not managing those pest populations for us. And then finally, we've got chemicals. So with this, we're managing pests with pesticides. And when it comes to houseplants, there are a limited number of chemicals that can be used for them. There's not a lot of things that are going to be labeled for indoor use. Again, this is typically we're going to be using fungicides and insecticides typically when it comes to houseplants. I would not be a good extension person if I did not tell you this. So make sure you read and follow all label directions. If you're going to be using any kind of pesticide, we're only going to use as much as the label allows. More does not equal better. If it says only use half an ounce, 2 ounces does not do any more good for you. Put as much as it says to. Again, make sure those products are going to be labeled for indoor use. Most pesticides are going to be labeled for outdoor use. So again, it can be kind of difficult to find some products sometimes. And we want to apply these in a well-ventilated area. And when we're applying them, we want to make sure it's only getting on the plant. It's not getting onto the dining room table or the kitchen counter, wherever those plants are. You want to make sure you're being careful about what that chemical is going to be getting on. Or if it's a warm day, take them outside, spray them, let them dry, bring them back inside. Depending on the type of pesticide you use, coverage is going to be important. So if you're using contact insecticides, those insecticides have to come into contact with the pest. If the pest doesn't touch it, that pesticide isn't going to work. So you need to have good coverage, upper sides of leaf, lower sides of leaf, growing points, all that. Get as much of that plant covered as possible. If you miss a leaf, the pests are on there, they're not going to be affected. That can be your source of reinfection down the road once that pesticide wears off. Systemic pesticides are going to typically be, in the case of houseplants, we're going to be applying those to the soil. Those will be taken up by the plant and moved throughout the plant. So they take a little bit longer to work, but that pesticide is going to be inside of the plant. So if you have something feeding on it, they will feed on that pesticide in the case of insects. So be familiar with how those chemicals work when you use them. And again, the label will tell you how you need to apply them. All right, so from here on out, we'll just talk about some of the more common pests we encounter on houseplants. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the more commonly encountered ones that we have. Again, when it comes to pest management, try to avoid them at all costs. So again, inspect your plants before buying them and bringing them indoors. Do not bring problems home or bring problems inside. If you're buying new plants, it may be a good idea to quarantine these plants. Put them in a separate room where you don't have other plants. Leave them there. Opinions vary between 2-3 weeks, a month. The longer you can leave them isolated, the better chance is that there are any pests on there, those populations will build up where you can notice them. You can deal with it. If you just buy it, you put them with everything else. If there's a pest on there you didn't see, now that can spread to everything. So it's a good idea to try to quarantine new plants. And even when you're bringing things inside, if you notice one has some pest problems and you can't leave it outside, quarantine that so you can deal with the problem before moving it with the rest of the ones. Or if you've got, plants, all your plants are clustered and you notice one has a problem, probably want to quarantine that one and maybe some of the surrounding ones too. So again, so that stuff doesn't spread quite as easily through your plants. All right, so first off, scale insects. So this is one if you ever buy citrus. For me, this has been my downfall for citrus and any plant that's grown near my citrus plants I've had in the past. So adults are immobile. You can see in this picture on the top right here, they're kind of these oval, and they have these waxy shells on them. So they're protected. So our contact insecticides don't really work on them because they have this waxy shell over them. So we're using systemic insecticides if we're going to use those. The immature, the nymphs are mobile. So that's the stage if we're spraying with the contact insecticide we're going to try to manage. They have piercing, sucking mouth parts, so their mouths are kind of like a straw. They'll stick this into the plant. They'll suck out the plant juices, and this can cause distortion. It can cause yellowing of leaves, stippling or spots on the leaves. And soft scale is going to produce honeydew. So when these insects feed, they take up more sugars than they need, and they'll excrete this. So that's kind of a sticky substance you see on leaves, and that can lead to the production of sooty mold in that bottom picture there, all that black stuff. That's a fungus that grows on that honeydew. It doesn't affect the plants. It's growing on the honeydew, but that can coat the leaves and reduce the amount of photosynthesis those plants can do. So it's kind of a double whammy from those plants there. So management for scale, we can remove these by scraping them off with a thumbnail, getting a sponge, rubbing them off, cotton swab, something like that, but you can physically remove them from the plants. And you can see in these pictures here, a lot of times they're along the leaf veins of the plants on the underside. So you're going to be doing a lot of flipping over leaves, wiping them down, and disposing them. If you have like a branch that's particularly heavily infested, prune that out, toss it. Maybe you can eliminate the problem or get rid of a lot of your problem and then wash off the rest if you have a few stragglers here and there. And then again, insecticides again, usually are going to be more systemic. Imidacloprid would be an active ingredient that you could look for that. Mealybugs are similar to scale insects. Again, they're small insects. They are mobile though. You can see in the top picture there, oftentimes they're covered in a white, powdery, waxy secretions. And they'll have small little projections coming off the side. Sometimes they'll have quote unquote tails coming off of them. Now you can see here again, this is another citrus plant we had. We have all these mealybugs again clustered along the veins or on the growth points and stuff. There's a lot of times where you will see them. They also have those piercing, sucking mouth parts. So again, they're causing yellowing, stunting. Populations get high enough, just like with scale, you can get dieback, or they can kill plants if the populations get high enough. And mealybugs are also going to produce honeydew. So again, we got sooty mold being a problem there. But and that's also an indication if you see if your plant leaves get kind of sticky or they're kind of shiny when they shouldn't be, then maybe you can use that as an indication that maybe you've got some of these scale or mealybugs or something like that feeding on that, producing that honeydew. Then you want to take a closer look. When it comes to management, again, cotton swab, dip that in alcohol, rub the mealybugs with that. That'll help break down that wax. The plants, the insects will dry out. Try not to get a whole lot of that on the plants. That can adversely affect the plants, but that's a pretty good way, pretty easy way to manage them. Again, it's going to be kind of slow and tedious. You're flipping over leaves, checking the growth points, stuff like that. But you can do a pretty good job of cleaning out a population by doing that. Again, you can prune out heavily infested areas, or looking at insecticides. With this, you can use some of the contact insecticides, horticultural oils, insecticidal soaps, something like that. Next, we've got whiteflies. So these are kind of look like tiny white moths, about 1/16 of an inch, and their wings are covered a lot of times in a powdery wax. You can see that in the bottom picture there. And when plants are disturbed, they'll kind of fly. Sometimes it looks like it's snowing if you have a big enough population, but they kind of flutter around when they're disturbed. Again, they also have this piercing, sucking mouthparts, so they can cause yellowing, stunting, some stippling, again, the spotting on those leaves, and they will also produce honeydew. Management, um, again, um, you can kind of wash them off. The adults will fly around. So sometimes you can put out sticky cards to try to trap them. The nymphs, you can see in the top picture there, they look similar to scale. They're not flying around. They're not terribly mobile. So again, you can cut out infected plant parts, things like that to eliminate them. And then again, insecticides, same kind of thing. Insecticidal soap, horticultural oil could be used to manage those. Aphids, I think a lot of times people think of these as more as outdoor pests, but we can get them on our indoor house plants as well. So these are small, soft-bodied insects, kind of pear-shaped, and relatively speaking, they have long legs, long antenna. In that top picture there, you can see in the middle that darker aphid. If you get really high populations, they will produce winged individuals. So if you start seeing aphids that have wings, that's an indication you have a really big population. And the populations are getting too big for that plant, so they're producing winged individuals. They can go off and start find other plants to feed on and stuff. Again, that piercing, sucking mouth parts. So again, we're getting that yellowing, the stunting, the distortion, honeydew creation. So you should probably sense a theme here. There's a lot of honeydew going on with a lot of these piercing, sucking insects. With these, we can wash them off, put the plants in the sink. If that's a little sturdier plant, wash them off in the sink. If you've got one of the ones that you can adjust it to like more of a spray setting, you can kind of blast them off. You may do that a few times. That may be all you have to do. Again, we can also use insecticides, same as we would with some of the others. And all the ones we talk about, so aphids, mealybugs, white flies, scale, they will be parasitized by insects. So a lot of times when they are attacked by other insects, they'll appear kind of dark. So if you see dark individuals there, that may be an indication they are being parasitized. So be careful if you see some of that. You don't want to eliminate those because you will have wasps or something like that emerging from that may attack other insects for you. Thrips. So this is another one that's probably a little more occasional, but we can see it indoors again, usually more of an issue outside. But they have these long spindle-shaped bodies, and they have a single sharp mandible. So when they feed, they're actually kind of rasping the plant surfaces with that, and then they will drink the fluids that are released when that happens. So you can see that picture on the bottom there. All those white spots, those are areas where those thrips have scraped off or scraped away the tissues. They fed on the plant juices that have been released from that plant. So you get these brownish or silvery streaks on the foliage or flowers of plants and stuff. And you can also get distorted growth if they get into the growing points. So twisting, cupping, the flowers can be distorted if they're feeding on the flower buds and stuff. With these, there are blue sticky cards that typically you're going to use for them for whatever reason they find blue more attractive. So if you have issues with thrips, you can put out the blue sticky cards to use that to monitor for those populations. You could probably try to trap them out as well. They tend to like a little less humid conditions, so try raising the humidity, make that environment a little less favorable, a little less likable for them. Can help manage those populations. They will pupate in the soil, so sometimes if you repot, clean off all that potting, clean off as much of that potting mix as you possibly can, and then repot. Eliminate those pupa. Don't leave that inside. Put that outside, so they this time of year they're going to freeze, so they're not emerging from that and reinfesting your plants. And then again, we've got the insecticide option, the soaps and the oils and stuff. Spider mites, again, is another one we commonly see outdoors that can also cause issues inside. So there's many different species of spider mites, but inside we're typically going to get two spotted spider mites. So these are small, 50th of an inch. So you may need a hand lens or something like that, or magnifying glass to see these. They're oval in shape, so you can see the top picture there, and they have two dark spots on either side of the body. Thus the name two-spotted spider mite. Again, they have these sucking mouth parts, and when they feed, the picture on the bottom here, this is on a dahlia. It's not necessarily a house plant, but you can kind of get an idea of what the damage looks like here. You get this spotted or speckled or mottled appearance, and you get this bronzing. So the leaves almost take on a bronze color because of the feeding damage. They will also produce webbing. So again, this is a pretty extreme example, but you can see that the spider mites that will produce all this webbing, all those little orangish things, those are giant clusters of spider mites again on these dahlias. This is in my backyard. I probably got much more excited about seeing this than I should have, or most people get when they see something like that. Scan management for these. These do not like these like dry conditions. So again, raising that humidity, make that environment less hospitable for them. Washing off plants again, putting them in the sink, breaking up that webbing, washing those mites off. And again, we can use pesticides, insecticidal soap, horticultural oil, something like that on the plants. But if you had a situation like this where you have that much webbing, I would say just throw that plant away unless it's got some real sentimental value. I would toss it and start over because of those. If you have that many on there, they're going to start spreading everywhere, and you're going to have a major problem on your hands. Other types of mites we can see, broad and cyclamen mites. I do not have pictures of the mites here because they're pretty much microscopic. So unless you have a really strong hand lens, you're not going to see them. You're just going to see the symptoms. So cyclamen mites, they can cause leaves to be puckered or distorted, and considered probably one of the more damaging, if not the most damaging pests of African violets. So you can see the top picture there, all that new growth, how distorted and stunted that growth is. That's because the cyclamen mites have been feeding on it. Broad mites are actually even smaller than cyclamen mites, and they're causing the bronzing or distorted or crinkled or thickened leaves. You can see picture on the bottom right there on these Gerber daisies. The one on the left was treated, sprayed to prevent broad mites. The one on the right had broad mite attacks. So you can see how distorted those leaves are. I'm willing to bet if you could feel them, they'd be much thicker than a typical leaf as well. So with these, best bet's going to just dispose the plants and start over. Some people will try to immerse the plants in hot water. You do this about 110, 120 degrees for 15 minutes. You're trying to cook the mites, but not kill your plants. So there's a fine line between cooking your plants and cooking the mites. So, I mean, if you're going to toss your plants and you want to try it, you're not out anything except a little bit of time. There are insecticides or miticides that you could try to use as well, but these are really small. You have to get really good coverage. If you miss anything, those populations will rebound. So again, if you have these, your best bet is probably just start over so they don't spread everywhere. All right, fungus gnats. Um, so again, small black flies you can see in the top picture there, and the larvae are going to be in the potting mix or in that growing media. The larvae feed on fungi, decaying organic matter. They may feed on the roots a little bit. These are more of a nuisance pest than anything else. They're not necessarily doing a whole lot of damage to plants, and they may feed on root hairs a little bit, but they're primarily after any fungus or decaying organic matter that may be in the soil. So if you have a lot of these, it's an indication your soil is probably a little bit too wet. So again, um, set out the yellow sticky cards to test to see for an indication that they're there. You can also trap out. Again, don't overwater. Let the potting soil, potting mix dry out in between waterings. That'll help reduce those populations, make it less attractive. Sometimes you can put a layer of sand on the top of the soil so the adults can't get down into the soil and lay eggs as easily. That can help reduce those populations as well. And then you can do a soil drench, some kind of soil drench with an insecticide. Or if you wanted to get something like the nematodes, again, that's going to be a little bit pricey, but the nematodes, there's some BT formulations, BTI will affect fungus gnats. So there's some different options if you want to try to manage them. Or another option would be to just repot the plants and dispose of that soil, the potting mix, try to get as much of that off plants as possible, and start over. Hopefully, you're not getting a bag that's full of fungus gnats already. And then occasionally we get some pests in the root ball or in the soil, particularly if we've had them outside for the summer and we bring them inside. Sometimes we may get ants, pill bugs, roly-polies, whatever you want to call them, millipedes. They can take up residence in the pots of our houseplants. Again, they're not really pests. They're more of a nuisance. They're not directly damaging the plants for the most part. But for this, we can remove the plant from that container and remove the insects. A lot of times the roly-polies, the millipedes are going to be more on the outside of the pot, so you can just hand pick those. If ants are present, you may want to repot because they can be kind of difficult to get rid of. You can do a soil drench with a pesticide. Sometimes you can kind of repeatedly flood that pot. Again, you're going to be doing this outside, but that can help drive the ants out. But this time of year, if you've brought them in, you've got ants in there, you may be looking at repotting if you don't want ants running around all over your house. And the roly-polies and stuff, they'll eventually, if they get out into your house, they'll eventually dry up and die. So just some final points here to wrap everything up. So again, keep our plants happy and healthy. Follow those recommendations on the plant tags on how much to water, how much light they need. Again, healthy, happy plants are able to ward off attacks from insects and disease much better than stressed plants are. Again, don't bring problems inside or bring problems home. Scout those plants when you're buying new plants. Quarantine them before you bring them in with the rest of your plants. If you're bringing stuff in from the summer, again, inspect those. Make sure you're not bringing stuff inside because once those insect pests get released from those natural enemies, those populations can really explode over time. And again, as hard as it might be to get rid of a plant, sometimes it's better to just start over than let those pests spread like wildfire through everything else, and then you're replacing all of your plants instead of just one or two. So with that, go to the questions if there's any.
AC, we have one.
Yeah,
I
we
think
just
question.
have one in the chat so far. So if others have questions, please go ahead and put them in and we'll address them right now. The one question we have, Ken, and thank you so much for a great presentation and really informative and beneficial as we go into the cold season and folks are turning their attention into their plants in the home. So thank you so much for your time today. Our one question is from Sue in the chat, and Sue's asking, can you spray alcohol for mealybugs?
So that may mess with like the waxes and stuff on the plants. You probably don't want to spray. You want to get that just on the mealybugs. There's a chance if you're getting that all over the plant, that's gonna cause some issues with the plants. So I would not just spray alcohol on the plants, especially if you're like using rubbing alcohol, which is a pretty high concentration. That may cause you more problems than it's going to solve.
Appreciate that, Ken. And we have gotten some additional questions in the chat, so thanks folks for sending those in. Our next question comes from Shauna, who is asking, what's your opinion on plug-in traps that are supposed to attract pests?
For the most part, from what the research that I read, they don't really do um, a whole lot. Like light traps can attract insects. Some insects are going to be attracted to light, but like the um, those can be effective. A lot of the others don't necessarily um, work all that well, or like the ones that repel the ultrasonic stuff um, doesn't really work all that well. But light traps can be effective for some different types of insects that are attracted to light.
Perfect. Good to know. And then turning to our next question from JEC, can you recommend some safe insecticides for herbs? Also, any suggestions for prepping plants before bringing them indoors?
So for herbs, I'm assuming you'd be eating these, so you want to make sure that again they can be applied to herbs. I'm trying to think of some chemicals here. Some of the pyrethrins or something like that. Soaps and oils could probably also be used. If you are going to be consuming those, you need to make sure you follow the pre-harvest interval. So any kind of insecticide you're going to be applying to foods you're going to eat is going to have a pre-harvest interval or a period of time you have to wait before you can safely harvest that stuff. And that's going to vary depending on the crop and the product you use. So the same product could have different pre-harvest intervals for different crops. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be consuming that stuff. As far as prepping plants for bringing them indoors, you know, for me, when I do this, it's usually a couple weeks before I'll start really inspecting them closely to see if I've got any pests on there. And again, as I've shared, sometimes I do a better job of that than others. I bring stuff in a lot of times still, but start looking at that stuff. If you notice any problems, start trying to rectify that. Again, when we're outside, there's more chemicals we have available than we do for inside. So if you're going to be spraying, doing that, again, if it's one that's got a lot of problems, a lot of times that just stays outside, and spends the rest of its life outside until it gets cold and killed. Because I'm not going to bring those pests in with me. But yeah, just inspecting to see what's out there. If you're concerned with ants or critters being in the soil, that maybe see if you can pull the plants out of the pot, inspect that soil to make sure that stuff isn't in there. Yeah, really just kind of getting started on the monitoring to see what potential problems you may have on those plants.
Very helpful. We really appreciate your guidance, Ken. Just a last call for questions before I hit the last one in the chat. Folks, if you have any last lingering thoughts, let us know. And then our final question from Dorothy. Can you comment on the use of neem oil? It's frequently mentioned on the internet.
Yes, it's an insecticide. It's a contact insecticide. Sometimes it's more. A lot of times it's smothering. There is some other effects too. It's going to be best for smaller, soft-bodied insects. For really big stuff, it may not work all that well, but it can be pretty effective. And not just for Nemo, but any of these insecticides we may be using, you may have to follow up. One spray may not do it. You may have to make multiple applications for this stuff. But yeah, for neem, it can be effective, but again, it's usually using it on smaller stuff, aphids, things like that.
Perfect. Okay, and then we have one last question in the chat of where can you find yellow or blue sticky cards? And somebody had replied they found the blue ones on Amazon. So is Amazon a good place or anywhere else you'd
Yes.
recommend?
You can buy anything on the
Yeah.
internet. I usually get them on the internet. Again, up in the Chicagoland area where you guys are at, you probably have a few more options than I do. Some nurseries, garden centers may carry them. Down here, I have not come across any. So yeah, I usually get them on the internet. Whether that's Amazon. A lot of some of the seed companies uh, will sell them too. If they sell pest control stuff, sometimes they'll have sticky cards and too, and they're not terribly expensive. So shop around if they're really expensive, or you may be getting a whole bunch too. So, and usually when you get them, you get a pack of them. A lot of times they have kind of wax paper in between the individual cards, so you can just use one at a time and keep them in a bag. Don't just let them sit out because everything will start sticking to them over time if you do not keep the stuff off there.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your responses. And I know we learned a lot this evening. I think that brings us to the end of the questions in the chat. So I will turn it back to Sue to wrap us up.
Well, thank you so much, Ken. This has given us a lot of food for thought, so to speak. And I hope that not many of you have to deal with these pests that are out there, but I can tell you in our household, we see them all the time. So we're always battling things on our orchids. It seems like it's hard to keep those little white creatures off them, no matter what we do. So I hope that you all have a good winter time as we are rolling into that, and that I know that this information will become very useful to you. And I hope not too useful in that you have to deal with all of this sort of thing. So thank you so much, Ken, for your insight and all this material in such a fast and very well done way. We really appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you for having me. Thank you for bearing with me as I navigated our internet issues here.
Welcome to the club. It's that way all the time. Whenever I even touch it, it seems like it doesn't like me. At any rate, thank you all for coming tonight. And don't forget to check out our website, fopcon.org, for upcoming things that are happening, especially in January. And we hope to see you at our seed swap as well. So have a good evening, everyone, and a good holiday season.